Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast, brought to you by Small House Farm. Join us as we talk with gardeners, foragers, herbalists, chefs, and community activists to explore the many ways that plants impact our cultures and cuisines, our history, and our future. I'm your host, Ben McGuinness, and this is Seeds and Weeds. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're joined by author and gardener Jen McGuiness to talk about her new book, Bird-Friendly Gardening. We're going to learn all about the important role that birds play in our ecosystem and how we can design our gardens to attract more birds. Plus, Jen's going to tell us about ways that we can attract more pollinators and beneficial insects into our gardens, and even some plants that we can grow that won't be bothered by the deer. It's an interview loaded with useful information, so be sure to stick around for that. Here at Small House, my spring schedule is starting to wind down. I've been on the road a lot this year already, so I'm looking forward to having some more time to spend here in the gardens. Towards the end of June, I'm going to be headed to the Modern Homesteading Conference in Idaho. I'm going to be speaking both days of the event, and there's a great lineup of presentations scheduled for the whole weekend. It's going to be my first time in Idaho, too, so I'm pretty excited about that. If you're interested in the event, find more information at modernhomesteading.com. If you're in the area or out for some travel, I definitely recommend this event. It is going to be a blast. As some recent events that I've been to, I've had some folks come up to me to tell me how much they enjoy listening to the show, and that is pretty awesome, I got to tell you. It's nice to get some feedback like that for sure. And I would love to hear from more of you. I mean, it could be as simple as a rating or a review on Apple or Spotify. If you tune in via YouTube, you could leave a comment and let us know what you think there. I mean, you could even leave a comment on our website, shoot me an email, whatever you like. You know, this is the 40th episode we put out so far, and I'm having a ton of fun over here. So I just want to know if y'all are having fun too. If you really enjoy the podcast, another awesome way that you can show your support is by joining our community over on Patreon. You can become a member for as little as $3 a month. And that financial support, it helps us to cover the costs associated with producing the podcast. You know, things like hosting platforms, our website, the time that goes into recording and editing each show. Our patrons literally keep the show on the air. And members get plenty of cool perks too. Seasonal small house products, exclusive content, heirloom seeds, all sorts of groovy stuff. You can find the link on our website down in the show notes or at patreon.com/smallhousefarm. This episode is also brought to you in part by our friends at Garden Joy, the garden game that lets you explore your love for plants, seasons, horticulture, and outdoor design. With Garden Joy, designing stunning settings for your flower gardens is not only fun, but it's also relaxing. You explore your creativity and design the garden of your dreams right now. And while you play, you'll learn about plants, seasons, and outdoor design. You can find Garden Joy in your app store or visit gardenjoygame.com. Jen McGuiness is a writer, editor, and photographer who began writing as Frau Zinni in 2011. Her website features Jen's writing, photography, and personal gardening experiences in her Connecticut garden, along with interviews with garden experts. She's a proponent of organic gardening methods and wildlife-friendly gardens. Jen's joining us on the show today to talk about her new book, Bird-Friendly Gardening. Jen McGuiness, my friend, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, you've got this wonderful new book out, just came out. It's called Bird-Friendly Gardening, and I am really excited to talk to you about it. But before we get into it, could you just tell our listeners maybe a little bit more about you and your background as a gardener and a writer?
Sure. So I've been blogging as Frau Zinni for several years now, and that was a way for me to start exploring, what I was doing in the garden when I first moved into my home. And I was ripping up systematically, of course, all the lawn that was out there because I wanted to put in more plants and more plants. And I guess I got that gardening bug. I was raised with it because my mom was into houseplants. My dad was always outside, chopping down something. He did some nice things too, but he was really into, landscapes and making paths and the scenic things. And my grandfather, he was very into vegetable gardening. So I had a really nice education, I would say, growing up with plants. And it was just always something that I had. So when I moved to my own house, I definitely wanted to make my own garden. And I started doing the blog to document that. And then I found over time that I really enjoyed interviewing other experts. And as you know, there's always something additional to learn in gardening. So then the blog became an extension of that. And it kind of took on a life of its own. So I've always been, out there working, focusing on pollinators, on food gardening, and definitely on making my property more attractive for birds too.
There's a ton of information on your website. It's fantastic.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I really enjoy working on it. And I had to take a little bit of a back seat on it recently just because I was working on the book, but now I'm ready to roll my sleeves up and get going again.
Now, I definitely want to talk about the new book, Bird Friendly Gardening, but if it's okay, first, I want to ask you a little bit about your previous book that came out in 2021. It's called Microfood Gardening, Project Plans and Plants for Growing Fruits and Veggies in Tiny Spaces. And when I first came across this book, I thought it was going to be about, growing regular sized plants in tiny spaces, but it seemed like it was actually more about growing tiny food plants. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So Microfood Gardening is a fun project-based book, does focus on a lot of the miniature varieties of vegetables and fruits and other edibles that are being created and bred now by a lot of the companies. And those will focus on plants that stay roughly like 18 inches or smaller. Some of those vines might get like a little bit longer, but they're still producing that mini-sized fruit.
That's super cool. And that's perfect for folks that, have a limited space, or maybe they're growing on their balcony or something like that.
Absolutely. Because there's a lot of, people who want to garden and grow their own food, but they just don't have a big area to work in. So the nice thing about microfood gardening is that you can take a stock of, well, I have a sunny patio, or I have a walkway that gets a lot of sun during the day, and maybe I can grow something on the wall that would be beneficial and, not only provide food, but look good too. So there's a lot of project ideas in the book that go through those different options and focuses on, like the mini micro tomatoes, which are my personal favorite, or, all the different types of lettuce and kale, and there's small eggplants, small peppers. I don't know if you've seen like some of the peppers that are like in hanging baskets now. So there's a lot more options for gardeners, and yeah, it's fun to repurpose items and make them into planters, and it's a feel good project.
But growing those micro things, they're fun. They're super cute. It's kind of a novelty. The kids love them. So I think that's a book that's good for folks with gardens of all sizes, really.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And they're fun too for, like you said, projects with kids or giving them as gifts to people. So yeah, it's a great introduction for people who haven't been gardening or just want to keep finding new ways to garden, right?
Right on. All right. Now let's dig into the Bird Friendly Gardening book. I got to ask first question, of course, Bird Friendly Gardening, gardening for birds. Tell me why. Why should we consider the birds when we're planning and planting our gardens? Why is that important?
So the birds definitely need all the help that they can get from us. There has been a 29% decrease in birds since 1970. So over that several periods of years, we've actually lost 3 billion birds in America.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it's just crazy to think that like the birds that you take for granted today, like, orioles or hummingbirds, or even the most common ones like cardinals that maybe hang around all season. I personally would hate to think that I'd have to go to an aviary in the future just to see them. So a lot of the reasons for this decline, there's climate change. There's problems with migration where birds are having trouble reaching their destination either because of bright lights during the migration season overnight. A major reason is there's a loss of habitat. All those new soccer fields, developments that go in, that gradually takes away land that, native plants would be naturally growing on. And those birds are getting their food from those native plants, either from the fruit or the insects that, will use that as a host plant. They just need all the help they can get. And if everyone just kind of focuses on adding those certain plants that can, add cover, food, shelter for the birds in their yard, it would help expand the network of availability for the birds and hopefully keep their numbers going.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned creating some sort of shelter for the birds. What are some other things, just basic things that any one of us could do just to kind of make our gardens a little bit more bird friendly?
Oh, so one great thing that is pretty easy is putting out fresh water through a bird bath. And as long as you're keeping it clean, birds are totally attracted to that water source, definitely during the hot weather and also in the winter. So if you have the ability to, use like a heated bird bath, that would be great because when a lot of the natural sources of water are frozen over, the birds are still thirsty, right? Just like you and me. So that would be a way to draw them in. And that's how I actually got eastern bluebirds to come to my garden in the winter. They were flying over and they found the water source and they were just there. Like it was like a magnet pulling them in. And it was such a thrill to look out the window and see like a bird bath party in the middle of the winter. And it's like, oh my God, we have bluebirds. This is great.
So many of the plants that you discuss in the book, maybe all of them, they're native plants that you're working with then?
That's right. Yeah.
And could you just kind of unpack for our listeners why it's important to have these native plants for the birds?
Sure. So a lot of the birds, like the main diet they focus on is insects. So to have plants that offer those insects for the birds, a lot of those plants need to be native because they're acclimated to our area. They've, have that symbiotic relationship with the insects that feed on them. And then that produces like the bird bird food. So another thing that goes hand in hand in that is organic gardening. So, not using pesticides in your garden, that's a huge thing, because if you're killing all the insects, then you're not going to have food for the birds. And there's a lot of pesticides that work their way up into the food chain too. So you definitely don't want to hurt the birds that way either. But a lot of those native plants, they're producing the berries, the insects that feed on them, as opposed to like those plants that come from, let's say, overseas, like, Asia, like a lot of those varieties that are really popular for landscape, but they just don't offer any nutritional value to the birds.
Now, a large part of the book is devoted to different bird-friendly garden projects, right? And these range, anywhere from ways to incorporate bird feeders into the garden, growing natives in containers, designing a garden to attract beneficial insects, all sorts of cool stuff. What are some of your favorite projects that you included in the book?
Oh, man. So we're talking about insects. So my favorite garden is the insect garden. And it was fun to intentionally design a garden that's going to bring in the insects, because, you think like, oh, no, I don't want insects eating my plants. But it's like, yes, you do. You do want those insects eating your plants, because then that's going to bring in the birds who are going to say like, oh, this is delicious, and I'm going to hang out here more often because this is where all the food's at. So that was a really fun one to create. And another one that I had a lot of fun with was the deer resistant garden. So personally, I, knock on wood, I don't have deer in my area in my garden, but my in-laws do. So I asked, can I set up this theoretical deer resistant garden in your area, in your yard? And they were like, yeah, sure. Like, you want to plant some plants for free? Go for it. So they were on board with that. And they have a very heavy deer population that works their way through that neighborhood. So in my mind, I was like, hey, if these plants make it with all those deer going around, like, this has to be a good thing. So they did. And that was the best part too. Like, you do the research, and there were a couple that were like, oh, they should be deer resistant, but they, didn't make it. And that would be like chokeberry, which is so sad. Rest in peace, chokeberry, but couldn't include you because the deer found you tasty. But it was really awesome to try it out and see it succeed. And then also, like, over time, like, just seeing that garden actually blossom and grow into the space and fill in. It was just so rewarding to see. So I would say those are like my two favorite in the book.
That's awesome. So like, you've got a garden, one of them is designed to bring in insects, another one's designed to kind of keep deer out of the way. Plants are doing some magic stuff out there.
They really are. And then, in addition to bringing in all the food, there's a lot of plants that are also providing cover for the birds. And that could be, cover from predators and also nesting material. So birds will nest in, different areas. When you're thinking about gardening, how there's like a bottom layer, a middle layer, and a top layer. It's true for the birds too, right? Like, there's a bunch of birds that will nest on the ground. Those are like really commonly like the prairie grasslands type of species, right? And then there's birds that will nest in the shrub area. And then, of course, like the trees. So when you incorporate all those different levels, you're not only producing like that beautiful garden layer for, yourself and for how the garden looks, but also different habitats for different birds to nest in.
Let's go back to the deer for a second. Every time I do a workshop or a class, everybody wants to, what do I do about deer? What should we do about the deer? So I'm sure everybody listening right now is like, needs to hear some names of plants that they can put in the garden right now. In the book, there's going to be a ton of that information, and we want people to buy it, but just a couple of teasers. Let some folks know a couple of plants that are going to help them out that the deer aren't going to be chomping on.
Sure. So one of them was blanket flower. They are perfect in full sun. They have a wide native range too. Like, you can, grow them out west to the northeast to the partial Midwest. So they did really well. Butterfly weed, the swamp butterfly weed, that did really well. Let's see. Also, the other type of milkweed that did well was Asclepias tuberosa. That's that butterfly milkweed with the orange flowers.
Oh, those are beautiful.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense, right? Like, you don't want to get the sap on you. I'm sure the deer probably find that just as undesirable, right? A lot of the Rudbeckia, they survived very well too. And that included the great cone flower, that's Rudbeckia maxima, and the black-eyed Susans that you think of, that Rudbeckia. There's a nice assortment there. And of course, you could also work in some of your grasses. So that way it gives you a little height, more of that cover and nesting material for birds. And that would include switchgrass. And I believe it was like one paddock grass. Those are also also two good ones. And, I've been going through like rattling them off really quickly, but that's just a couple of the plants that we used in my in-laws garden, and they're all included in the book too.
Now, one of the projects that jumped out to me was the section on growing your own bird seed. Could you share a little bit with us about how we might grow our own bird seed or some plants that might be good choices for bird seed?
Sure. So my favorite plant for growing your own birdseed is actually the coneflower, because you can leave it up in your garden and it will, draw in all the finches because they'll just be attracted to those seed heads. So you could, leave the flowers to harvest and then snip them and save them for the winter. But part of the fun is just seeing who shows up in the fall and early winter to feast on those plants that you leave standing. Another great one is, of course, sunflowers. So the trick with sunflowers is making sure you can get those seeds to ripen before probably the squirrel would find it first. So I talk about how you can cover it in like cheesecloth, so that way the seed head can breathe and still produce the seeds, but it's a little bit protected then from the squirrels who might just run up there and try to get your bounty before it's ready,
What are the links that folks are going to need so they can connect with you, check out your blog, and get their copy of your new book?
So you can find me at frauzinnie.com, and that's FRAUZINNIE. I'm also on Instagram as Frau_Zinnie. Same thing for Facebook. And then I'm on Threads as well as Frau Zinnie, and trying out TikTok. It's a little hit and miss. Sometimes I just share videos of my house rabbit instead, but having fun with it. And that's all that really matters, right?
That's all that matters, as long as you're having fun. And I'll put all of those links down in the show notes so folks can find it and just click right on through too.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks so much.
Of course, Bird-Friendly Gardening, guidance and projects for supporting birds in your landscape. The brand new book from Jen McGuiness, now available everywhere the books are sold. Jen, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. That was fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. I would love to talk about birds for, so much longer, but thanks so much for having me on.
It's hard to believe, but we have come to the end of yet another show. Big thanks to Jen McGuiness for being our guest today, and to all of you for tuning in. Remember, if you enjoy the show, you can always show your support by joining our Patreon community. You can find that link and many more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm, and the music we're enjoying right now is Gypsy Jazz Guitar from William King. Thanks again for joining us, friends. I'm Bevan Cohen, and we'll see you next time.